Hello and welcome to our video where we are going to figure out how to run our validation.py script against multiple files. Okay. So to start, we're going to create a new file here and let's call it getFileNames.py. Something pretty simple. Okay. So what we need to do is to figure out how exactly we get to the directory we care about and then how to iterate over that directory and print out the file names that we need, so that way we can use those file names in a loop, similar to how we use this validation.py script. Okay, so instead of opening that file directly through this chunk of code here, we're going to point to a directory and say, loop over everything. If the file is a TOML file, run it through these checks. Okay, so to start, we're going to import OS. And then we're going to say for root directories and files in os.walk, do something. So essentially how this works is it's looking at the root directory, the directories contained within, and the files within a given file path, and it'll spider through the file directory that you give it. Okay, so how do we get the directory that we care about? In my example, I have everything on my iDrive and Google, TCM subfolder, and then Python. And right now, all my data is just in GitHub. If you type in pwd, which means present working directory, you'll get your current file path. We're going to copy this and put that right in here. All right, now that we have this command, so for essentially starts off a loop. We're going to have to do another one. Okay, so we're going to say for file in files, file ends with .toml, print the file. Okay, so as this OS walk is spidering through the directory, it's keeping note of all the files, it's keeping note of all the directories. And what we're saying is, given all the files that it observes within spidering through this directory, check to see if it ends in a .toml, and then print that file name. So let's see what that looks like. This is now finding every single detection document within the GitHub repo that we cloned, but we also see our examples here from our previous videos. So let's say we want to be more intentional with what we're checking for and not iterate over all of the detection dash rules. What we can do is have a file, or a folder rather. We're going to call it custom alerts. And what we're going to do is put a couple test alerts into this custom alerts folder and run it against those specifically. All right, so if we're on this right now, nothing is going to come up. Our folder is empty. And what we can do here is grab a couple of these rules, copy them, and we're going to place it in our custom alerts folder here. So this will be a nice data set that we can use. And I realize I mistyped my folder, which makes sense why the script wasn't working. Try this again. And here we go. We have the 3 file names that we care about. I'm just taking a quick look at these because I didn't pick these out of any kind of intentionality. So we have EQL, which is a type that we know about. We have query, which is a type that we know about. And we have another query. So those will all work for our validation script for testing. So now that we know how to iterate over files, what I want to do is grab this and place it in our validation.py script. So we no longer need a reference to a single file. What I like to do is at least keep that in a comment. So if we need to do testing on a very specific alert, you can take the comment off, add in the file name, and you can do some testing on a single alert versus iterating over all of your documentation. Okay, but instead of printing files, what we want to do is load them in. Okay. And again, I'm going to comment this to make it more readable. I'm just going to chuck this over in the top. And what we can do to test this is just print alert data. And what you'll notice here, if we try to take this script as is and chuck it in here to make it work, it doesn't recognize a file directory. And that's because these files are in a different path than the validation script. So we need a way to not only grab the file name, how we did before, but grab the directory as well. And what we can do, instead of file here, we're going to make a variable here called full path. And we're going to actually create this path by using this spider functionality here. And we're now saying the root and file add together to create the full path. All right. And what we can do to make sure this works is quickly comment this section out, print full path, run it. And you can see it printed out the full path for the 3 alerts that we care about. Ignore this error here. It's not going to work because we haven't gotten this all configured quite yet here. But the main point is that the full paths of the files exist. So now we can run this script on files that are outside of the root directory of wherever the script is currently residing in. So now what we're going to do is uncomment that, but we can hit run. And what we can see is that this TOML library is successfully parsing through and printing all these alerts. And then you can see our validation pass for the very last alert because it only knows about the last one from this loop. Okay. This variable essentially gets rewritten for every time the data gets loaded in. So by the time it reaches all these statements, all it really knows is this last object here. Okay. So what we have to do to fix that is add all this code into this loop. And pretty simply, what we can do is highlight this whole block. And we're going to add some tabs in. So now what we're saying is walk through the directory, grab only the TOML documents, create the full path of the TOML document, open that full path, read it through a TOML library into a variable called alert, and then go through the validation test here. And you can see it past each of these alerts here. There are some other little tidbits we can edit in here. Okay, so for example, let's say that we go into one of these alerts, and let's say we change the type to something that doesn't exist. What happens when we run this validation script? All the validation script knows is that missing fields doesn't exist because none of these checks were able to be made, and that's a big problem, right? So what we can do is write a basic else statement. So it's saying if none of these match, we could do something like this. So we're saying if none of these exist, we need to pipe out an error here. And what's fun is that the script keeps going on, which we don't want to do. Okay, what we can do is to make sure that the script doesn't continue to execute once that error occurs. Okay. And what we can do is type in break, which essentially means to stop running the current loop and to go to the next loop. And now we see just the error for the rule and not the fake validation from our previous version of the script. Okay, now we have our more revised version of the script. We have enough functionality where we can iterate over an entire directory now instead of a single file and make sure our alerts have the proper fields that we need. All right, in the next video, we're going to start digging more into MITRE data. I'll see you in the next one.